All right, my name is Matthew Spoke. I'm in town visiting from Toronto, where the majority of the Aion Foundation's team is. We're a distributed team kind of around the world, with most of our people being in Toronto and Shanghai. But we're a smart contract platform. We've been around since about 2017. I've been in the industry prior to that since early 2014, when I was working pretty heavily in the enterprise blockchain space around how large institutions were going to start working with this technology. And at that eventuality, when the mainstream world would start paying attention to what we're doing. I'm not going to talk about the Aion Foundation today. I want to talk to you about something else that we're calling the missing middle. And organizations like ours, the Aion Foundation, the Ethereum Foundation, and others, have been very aggressively working over the last couple of years on solving the challenges of the protocol. And the challenges of the protocol have generally been bucketed into a couple of key words that you've probably heard, words like scalability and interoperability and performance and transactions per second, and all of these things being very, very real bottom layer of the stack engineering problems. What we found is that with the evolution of a lot of these protocols, we haven't seen the mainstream adoption pick up that we all expected. And our hypothesis that we're starting to spend more time working on today is that there's still this massive gap, this gap we're calling the missing middle. And so, it's kind of an interesting coincidence that today, if I can get this slide to change. I don't know if this is on. Give me 1 second. There you go. Oh, if you want to follow me on Twitter. So today is actually the 30th anniversary of the World Wide Web. So happy birthday to the World Wide Web. Tim Berners-Lee, 30 years ago, released to the world this idea of what the web would be. Obviously, we all know and understand this pretty well. We're all here thinking and talking about this thing we call Web 3.0. It's this massive promise of what the internet could turn into, what business models could look like, what the economics of working online might evolve into. But what's still been missing is adoption. Why has this concept of Web 3.0 not reached the mainstream audience? Beyond speculating on crypto, beyond trading in Bitcoin, why have protocols like Aion and Ethereum and EOS and IPFS and others not really changed people's lives? So we've got these great ideas, applications talking about how to change the business models of online advertising, applications talking about changing data storage and making it more censorship resistant, but still this massive gap to mainstream adoption. So I'm going to walk you through a couple of reasons of where we are today, what's happened in the industry, and what I think are still some of the limitations and problems that regular app developers, day-to-day app developers and web developers are facing when they try to solve problems in this space. So this is a little bit of kind of a backdrop of where we're at. You're probably familiar with some of these numbers. We've seen over the course of the last 2 years about $25 billion come into this industry. And we did a quick little analysis, and we split this into two buckets. We said about $5 billion of this money came in what we called efficient capital, coming through traditional venture capital firms where due diligence and scrutiny was put onto the companies that they were investing in. But the large majority is over here. This inefficient capital that was the ICO market, that was the speculative traders that kind of flooded in mass numbers to pump volumes into coins that they didn't understand the technical merits of. But what's been left behind as a result of this trend, even though most of these technologies have not really reached mainstream capabilities, is that we, in the process of raising $25 billion collectively, have trained some incredible engineers. We've developed some really interesting IP, and we've started to introduce concepts to the world, but we've left this massive gap. And so when you look at any trend in technology, they tend to look something like this. You go through a couple of stages as you go through technology. You start with this concept of experimentation. You eventually want to get to scale, focus, and balance, and eventually the industry starts to become norm. We're still down in this bottom left quadrant of this graph. And you can see this in the market with pretty simple things. As David was mentioning in his introduction, very, very small number of active dApps. And of those dApps, very, very, very few active daily users. Some of these active dApps actually have less than 100 active daily users. So massive gap towards mainstream adoption that just simply hasn't happened. If you've been following the story of Consensus, you've heard of Consensus 1.0 and the reorganizing that large, massive company in our industry has to go through because they were simply focusing on experimentation, not focusing on commercialization, and not focusing on adoption. We still today have about 15 to 20 dApp platforms. You look around the room in this kind of hall, you'll see everything from Ethereum to Tron to EOS to Ontology and others. We think the industry's probably going to start to converge down to a smaller number. And we still have a massive and fragmented group of exchanges and wallets. We haven't yet left this experimentation. We all fight amongst ourselves in the industry. We all try to figure out who's better than who. But the reality is that 99% of the market doesn't know we exist, and they don't care about what we're building. And that's the big challenge that's facing the industry today. If you look at an average app developer that works in the Ethereum ecosystem or any of these crypto ecosystems, they generally have one characteristic. They are enthusiastic about this technology, and we'd probably put them into this bucket of early adopters. Most app developers and software engineers out there are not driven by philosophy and these types of intrinsic motivations. They just want software that works. They want software that solves their problems, and they want to essentially start to approach these things the way they approached software development in the past with other frameworks. So I'm going to tell you a quick little story to kind of highlight this, and we've made up fake names and fake companies, but this is a real person that we've spoken to that works for a real company. So in this context, I call her Alice. Alice is a product manager at a company called Yum Yum, we'll say. They're a growing and fast food delivery company, massive across the US, and they're very interested in figuring out how to tie a loyalty system into their food delivery service so that they can start to incentivize certain behaviors within their application. They stumbled across the concept of blockchains and decentralized applications, and they wanted to figure out how to approach this. So first thing Alice did, obviously, she came up with an idea. She said, loyalty points for my food delivery service on the blockchain makes sense. I'm a normal software company, but I think there's a characteristic in this technology that actually allows me to do something slightly different than what I could do without it. So they come up with this idea, and they kind of talk about it in the office, and everybody's on the same page. Let's go experiment with blockchain technology. Let's go look at building smart contracts and decentralized applications. So the planning starts. They hit the whiteboard. They say, who do we need to talk to? And they go out to the market, and this, I'm just going to try to highlight some of the gaps that are really, really obvious in the market today if you are a non-blockchain company trying to come into this space. They go out to the market and they say, who can help me down this path? Let's go find the best and brightest service companies that know how to do blockchain development. And they come across 15 or 20 companies that they start to vet, and they realize that everybody's experience is very, very singular focused. You've got companies that have built smart contracts for ICOs. That's it. They know how to build token contracts. They know how to do fundraising. They have no idea how to fit into a software development cycle or workflow. So she's a little bit left kind of having to figure out, well, what do I do? You know, this is a completely new stack. It's a completely new technology. My team's not familiar with it, and I don't find kind of capable expertise in the industry that seems to be able to answer these questions. So when they go to build, she realizes, I don't know anything about Solidity. I don't know anything about Truffle. I don't know anything about these new frameworks and languages. So how do I build my new application? So she kind of fumbles around and she finds a company and she says, let's get building. They don't know how to do project management. They don't know how to do regular product management. They don't know how to fit into regular software stacks. All they know how to do is write Solidity code. And they don't know what that means to the user experience, and they don't know where that fits into my back-end application. Because again, I'm Yum Yum, and I'm a real-world business. And so she struggles with this. She has to kind of pair her team with some random team in Eastern Europe that's doing Solidity coding and sending her .sol code files. Doesn't know what APIs to plug into, doesn't know any of this stuff. And it's obviously a really, really painful process for her. We've seen a lot of companies kind of fumble and stop here. Because if you go into the regular software world, a dime a dozen, you can find great shops that can help you with product development and help you through that cycle. In the blockchain industry, we're still massively far behind in this cycle. But one way or another, Alice is determined. She gets through her build cycle and she says, let's get to testing. Let's figure out how to prove that what we've built is useful, it's stable, and all of a sudden people can use it securely. They're not going to lose all their money on my platform. So she says, who knows how to do security testing? Who out there is the best and brightest in the security world? Once again, she finds this very, very narrow and niche skill set. She finds companies that know how to do static code reviews of Solidity contracts, but don't know how to do penetration testing, don't know how to do integration testing, and don't know how to do ongoing security monitoring after that application is live. So she gets this really, really static view of this code base, still doesn't quite understand if it's going to break the entire sequence of her business logic in her application, and she's left having to deal with this very, very limited functionality. So there's still a massive gap in the security and testing place. But she gets through it. She's still resilient and determined, so she kind of makes her way through to launching this test version of their new loyalty points program, and she wants to get people on board. And then she gets introduced to this thing called MetaMask. And she realizes that customers have to go online, they have to download a weird browser plugin to even be able to go to her website. And if they don't do that, they can't talk to her application. On mobile, it doesn't exist, it doesn't work. She can't figure out how to get people to put tokens into her Yum Yum food delivery app. And all of a sudden, she's stuck. Users don't want to download this new feature. Her beta completely fails. So she's starting to figure out, oh, maybe there's a couple of companies out there working on new forms of mobile SDKs. Maybe there's people working on new types of APIs, but they're all super, super early stage. But she kind of fumbles through. She finds a couple of crypto users that are willing to go through this painful process of the MetaMask experience, and then she launches her product. Obviously, she's a Silicon Valley and San Francisco company, so she pays her engineers close to $200,000 a year. She doesn't want those people auditing or maintaining code for the lifetime of this application. So she says, who's going to maintain this? Which companies out there have built professional application management services so that once my app goes to production, I can have confidence that bug fixes, customer support, and non-Twitter, Telegram communication channels exist for my customers to actually interact with? Again, she gets blank stares back at her from the crypto industry. Nobody has figured out how to take applications to production use. This is a very common story. If you're a crypto user today, you're familiar with going through a lot of this stuff, but you're willing to because you're an early adopter, you're enthusiastic, and you've probably made some money on crypto. The 99% of the world that we want to come into our industry gets stuck right here, both on the developer side as well as the consumer side. So what we started focusing on was how do we make this jump? How do we make this jump from experimentation to scale? What is missing in the industry that we've been calling the missing middle that essentially will open the floodgates of app developers to simply have tools that work, simply have frameworks and pieces of infrastructure that they can plug into that don't require them to know how to interact with a protocol directly. So one, this is going to happen through a much more efficient use of capital into specialized companies. Companies that don't try to do 11 things, they do one thing very, very well. They become application management service companies or mobile SDKs for app developers on iOS or one specific thing, node hosting infrastructure. So we're going to see capital getting redirected. You find a lot of blockchain companies with too many things on their plate. They don't do any one of them very well. We're also going to start to see the concept, this very old school and maybe boring concept from the software world that we call SLAs, software licensing agreements, where there are support agreements and people that will actually answer the phone if your application stops working. And they can maintain it on an ongoing basis throughout its life cycle. First impressions in the industry are terrible today. First time somebody downloads a crypto app, they usually walk away. User experience and first impressions still have a long way to go, and we're going to see companies that step in and only focus on the UX versions of this. And then we're going to see more and more partnerships into the legacy software worlds, flexibility in the workforce in terms of separating people's focus and not having everybody kind of all in one bucket. This is what we call the missing middle, and it kind of gets summarized into a couple of very meaningful categories of businesses that we think are direly lacking in the industry today. If you're working in one of these boxes, you're probably the exception. And even if you are, we think there's a long way to go to professionalize some of these products and services. So, without going through the exhaustive list, if you're on the left side of this slide, you're an app. You're an app trying to get to consumers, you're an app trying to get to the mainstream, and you keep failing on the basis that you're trying to solve the entire stack, and you're trying to solve the entire service. And you realize that professional software companies outside of our industry have specialized. They buy servers from Amazon Web Services, and they buy security services from other companies, and they buy tools from JetBrains of the world, and they don't try to do everything in-house. We're about to go through this transition where specialization at different layers of the stack is going to start happening. And companies that might sound a little bit more narrow and might sound a little bit more boring are going to start slotting themselves into these categories and dominate these categories. We've heard time and time again from developers that we work with that they would pay for these types of infrastructures if somebody was offering it to them, yet nobody is. Why? Because in 2017 and 2018, you cannot do an ICO on these businesses. So nobody did. Nobody built these. These are equity businesses where you charge licensing fees and subscription agreements. These are not sexy ICO tokenized models. So they just got ignored. Anything that exists in here today is generally the byproducts of somebody's application development process, but it has not been focused or productized. And this is where we think 2019 is going to take us, is to a significantly more organized and professional middleware stack so that we can get these applications over to the right side of this slide, user adoption, enterprise users, mainstream consumers, which is really where we all want to see the industry go. And if you're really interested in the price of crypto, this is condition number one. Condition number one is that the world starts to figure out that this technology matters, that it's an operating system for the future of applications. But this is only true if we can solve the middleware. So with all of our focus over the last couple of years on building protocols at the Aion Foundation, which we continue to do and will continue to do for the next decade, this focus on middleware, on building tools and infrastructure above the protocols is in dire need of focus. So I'll leave you with kind of a couple of final thoughts. This is an area where I'm spending a lot more time on, a few of my teammates in the audience, but we're starting to very actively look at how to invest and put capital into this category of missing middle companies. If you're interested or already working in this space, if you think this is something that that resonates with you in terms of how do we get a normal developer sitting in a normal software company to come into our industry and start building normal software with crypto, then we want to talk to you. So if you have a chance, come find me after. We'd love to be a little bit more collaborative. The one kind of interesting fact about this type of business, which will probably blow most people's minds, is you don't have to buy in and bet on a single protocol. You can build tooling companies that are applicable across the board, that are generic to the industry, and that are useful to developers that do not have a particular affiliation for one blockchain protocol or another. So with that, I'll leave this as kind of my prediction. If you want to buy into any type of new next trend, blockchain tooling, blockchain infrastructure is kind of the thing to watch in 2019. Thank you very much.